Yes, I'm also.
היי, שלום לכולם.
I'm also able to record. I'm recording on my computer right now.
Okay.
Thank you. שלום לכל מי שהצטרף אלינו.
אהלן.
זאב, מה העניינים?
מתכוננים?
וואו, איזה דגל יש מאחוריך, חבל על הזמן.
בטח.
"24 participants so far. הנה גם כן אליעד פה. אליעד המלך. שבחר נכון והגיע לאירוע נכון. אתה על מיוט.
שלום.
אדם האפט.
אהלן, אדם.
מה העניינים?
ניר, מה העניינים? פעם ראשונה שאני רואה אותך.
מה העניינים, אסף?
הכל בסדר?
ברוך השם, מה איתך?
מקצוען. כל מה שהבאת עד עכשיו, אמרתי את זה לפני כן גם כן לצ'ימבה.
באמת.
אתם חבורה של מקצוענים.
תודה, חבר'ה, תודה.
ערב טוב.
אנחנו מקווים שהיום אנחנו רק מתחילים.
חבר'ה, גם אם אין את כל האנשים, אנחנו נתחיל לדעתי בזמן, כי חבל...
בסדר.
איך מומלץ לפתוח את הבקבוקים? בסיבוב. תשתדל שהם לא יהיו הפוכים גם כן.
Okay, so for our English speakers, which is Drew and Richard, I will introduce you to everyone. But first of all, I will introduce myself. Hi, קוראים לי צ'ימבה, אני מנהל המקצועי של חברת קספיריטס, מאוד 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 שמח לארח אתכם בסדנה הזאת. עשינו שיחה מקדימה עכשיו עם דרו, ובשלושה משפטים הבנו שהולך להיות פה משהו מאוד 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 מעניין. אני לא רוצה לגלות לכם הכל, ופשוט רוצה לתת את הבמה לדרו. So I want to give the stage for Drew. Drew is a master blender and a director of quality at Sazerac, who knows Sazerac company. And I will take it from here. Thank you, Drew. Thank you, Richard.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. Can I have the screen?
חבר'ה, בבקשה רק שכולם ישימו על מיוט את זה כדי שלא נפריע לדרו. תודה. Drew?
Yeah.
Stage is yours.
Do I have the screen? Does everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, thanks for having me. Like I said, I'm broadcasting here from Frankfort, Kentucky at the Buffalo Trace Distillery plant. Has anybody been to Buffalo Trace? I guess you can't talk, right? No, I guess not. There's a picture of Buffalo Trace in the spring. And I'm Drew Mayville, the master blender. You got to get used to my sense of humor, but I'm the master blender for Sazerac. And I thought I would talk a little bit about Sazerac and myself and Buffalo Trace. We'll talk a little bit about organoleptic evaluation and what we recommend. We'll talk a little bit about Buffalo Trace and the process.
נסגר על הכוסות, על הקוקטיילים, ונטעם, נחליט. ונסגר, יאללה, קדימה.
חבר'ה,
Aleph,
מיוט,
if you
מיוט.
don't mind muting.
Is someone translating, or is that?
No, somebody just by
Okay.
mistake probably.
Okay, I thought maybe I didn't understand. We're going to be translated or something. That's good.
No.
I'm glad, because that delays everything so much. So I'll talk about the process at Buffalo Trace, if that's all right. Experimental and our expansion a little bit. But during that whole process, we'll do some tasting in between, if that's all right. I find that works the best. So a little bit about me. I've had over 40 years of experience in this industry. I work for two of the largest distilleries in the world, Seagram's, which is no longer in existence. And I actually was the last master blender at Seagram's. I worked there for 23 years. And then I went with Diageo, current largest distillery in the world. And now over 16 years, it's actually over 17 years with Buffalo Trace Distillery. And we're actually by volume the third largest distillery in the world. So back in 1982, this was me tasting. So you could see between then and now, my hair is a little bit lighter in color, but basically doing the same type of tasting as I do now. And there's me in our current lab in Frankfort, Kentucky, tasting. As you can see, we have lots of samples to taste. As a matter of fact, I probably taste several hundred samples every day of different types of products. So a little bit about Sazerac. We have a vision to be a highly successful builder of global spirit brands. And the reason I bring this up is because Sazerac has a lot of distilleries around the world that I actually get involved with. You may have heard of some of these. Obviously, Buffalo Trace. We have a distillery here in Kentucky also called the 1792 Distillery. We have Paul John Distillery in India, which makes some great single malts. We have the Old Montreal Distillery. As a matter of fact, this list is out of date because we have another distillery in Canada called Collingwood, and we make lots of products there. We have the A. Smith Bowman Distillery. We have a Tennessee distillery making Tennessee whiskey, but we have not released any products yet because the oldest is around 3 to 4 years old. We have another distillery that doesn't actually produce, but it's called the Last Drop Distillery, which produces some very ultra premium products. And we have our cognac distillery, Domaine Sazerac de Zigonzac. So lots of activity at Sazerac, and we get involved with all that. This I saw on a street corner outside a bar in Seattle. Whiskey won't solve all your problems, but it's worth a shot. So I always like a little bit of humor during my presentations. I hope you don't mind. So a little bit about organic evaluation. We got these experts all over the world describing products that we make. And one thing that's in common with all of them is that they're all different. I could actually send all of them different samples or the same sample, and all of them will give me different responses as far as descriptions. And so what I'm trying to say is that everybody's tastes are different, but there is some commonality. When we taste, we like to taste the recipe. Depending on the recipe or the mash bill really dictates how that product will taste. For instance, rye bourbon is produced from corn, rye, and barley malt. And so when we taste a rye bourbon, which we're going to taste today or tonight, is basically most bourbons are rye bourbons. So the majority by law has to be corn. So at least 51% needs to be corn. And that inherently makes the product sweet, fruity, and that's because of the corn. The rye gives you the spiciness, and the barley malt is mostly for the enzyme, but it may give you slight nuttiness in your product. Whereas, you know, if you make Scotch, you're primarily using the last one. So a wheated bourbon is the minority of bourbons that are made, and there's no rye in a wheated bourbon. So our wheated bourbon, Weller and Pappy Van Winkle and those products, and our biggest competitor probably on a wheated side would be Maker's Mark. These are wheated bourbons, so the recipe is different, the mash bill is different. Majority is corn. The second grain or small grain is wheat and barley malt. So again, you're going to get a different taste profile because of that. So as far as tasting, we don't like to have food prior to tasting because it can really screw up your taste. As a matter of fact, we stay away from spicy foods, from sweets. All that will affect your taste before you do any tasting. Personally, I believe whiskey is perfect as it is. Some people like to put it in cocktails. Some people like to drink it with ice. Some people like it with tonic. It just depends on the individual, but I think it's perfect as it is. Some people like to add a little bit of water to open it up. I would recommend that you taste it straight first and then add a little water. And sometimes it opens up. It's less harsh as far as the ethanol is concerned. So some people do that. And when we taste, we like to taste a little bit at first and then just relax for a little bit and taste again because your palate adjusts. And so you can see different things and different characteristics after that. As far as nosing, there's different techniques. You can just stick your nose in a glass. I call that the ramrod approach, where you really, you know, one of these techniques will work for somebody. They don't work for everybody, but I really lose a lot of the top notes if you do that. Some people go really quick. They like to smell real quick like this. I call that the drive-by nosing technique. Some people like the slowpoke methodology, where you just hover above the glass. And then you just move slowly back in. So you get the top notes and then you get some more of the deeper notes as your nose goes into the glass. Some people actually like rolling the glass. So you start swirling it like that as you're nosing, like rotating the glass like that. And some people even like the horizontal approach, where you just put your nose more at the top and you smell some of the top notes like that. So different techniques for different people. Some people like to use some or all of them. And really, like I said at the beginning, there's no wrong answers. It's very personal. As a matter of fact, at Buffalo Trace here, we have a tasting panel. And that panel is actually designed to be different because everybody tastes different things. Some people are more sensitive than others. We look at products for not only the positive attributes, but for negative attributes, and we train people on that. So some people, for instance, if you look at TCA, you know, wine, you get it in wine quite frequently. You do get it in spirits, but it's from the cork, that trichloroanisole. Some people can be very, very sensitive to parts per trillion to that. Some people not as sensitive, and that's why the panel exists. Sometimes warming the glass can help assist in releasing aromas. As a matter of fact, one expert that I work with actually warms it in a hot water bath, which is kind of unusual, but everybody likes something different. But warming actually can release aromas, especially the top notes. Some experts don't like doing that, so depending on who you are. So that swirling will get the aromas going towards the glass, because this glass actually is tapered so that all the aromas are starting to waft up, just like the Glencairn glass. We could talk about 20 minutes on glasses, but we won't get into it today. So when we sniff, we keep our lips parted so that it circulates through the nasal cavity, and actually you get a lot of smells that way that you might not get if your mouth was closed. And then I always like to say, draw on your memory what you remember, because sensory is a lot of memory. Actually, the hardest thing for a panel like our panel is actually to calibrate the memory. So what smells like Christmas, like cinnamon and those types of spices, may be something slightly different for someone else. And there's lots of examples of that. So when we taste, we like to take a sip and repeat, like I said. And I like to remind people that each whiskey has a story to tell you. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. So as it enters, your initial impression will be different from the finish. So as it transmits across your palate, from beginning to middle to end, you'll see a difference. And each whiskey will have a different story to tell. And that's probably the easiest way to explain how we taste. And again, when you taste, you do if you keep your lips parted and you bring in oxygen, just like you do with wine, it really adds to that perception of the taste. And then you have the finish, or when you swallow. So when you're actually tasting, we like to call that the Kentucky chew. So really what that means is you smack your lips together like that, and that's called the Kentucky chew. And then the Kentucky kiss is when you swallow it, it warms as it's going down your throat. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the tasting methods before we taste. We'll talk a little bit about Buffalo Trace, and then we'll taste the first one, if that's all right. I think everybody has their kit in front of them, right? So you could probably get ready on your White Dog sample, because we'll start with that in a couple minutes, if you're not ready already. So we've been making whiskey here where I am since 1773. So it's over 200 years of history of making whiskey, which is quite old. It's even comparable to some Scottish distilleries. And we've been making it continuously here through world wars, through floods, and now even through COVID. We were making hand sanitizer for our hospital industry and industries in general. We actually ran through Prohibition here in the US, and we actually made medicinal whiskey. And you could actually go to your doctor and get a prescription of a pint of whiskey for an ailment that you had. So that was pretty cool. We actually renamed this distillery in 1999 Buffalo Trace Distillery. And the reason we call it Buffalo Trace Distillery is because the buffalo actually were migrating past here, because there's a low point in the Kentucky River, which we're right on. And the buffalo used to go right across here. So that's why we call it Buffalo Trace Distillery. And we've been called a lot of names over the years, from OFC Distillery, Carlisle Distillery, E.H. Taylor Distillery. So a lot of history here. And we uncovered Bourbon Pompeii, which actually was the old 1873 distillery. This is what it looked like back in 1870s. And so we were renovating, and we found the remnants of the old distillery there. You can see part of it there. And there's actually the fermenters. And so we honor that tradition, but what we did is fix that up and actually relined one of the fermenters the way that E.H. Taylor had it originally. And we relined it with copper. And there it is as an example of what we're doing, is we're actually producing product in that fermenter that he used back in the 1800s. And it's just relined with copper the way he did it. So that's pretty cool. That product is aging right now and hasn't been released yet. But one thing I can tell you is it's different from what we make. And so we've come a long way from an old rundown distillery. We brought it back to an old distillery the way it should look. There's our warehouse C that E.H. Taylor built into a very tourist friendly, because we offer a lot of tours. We were the most visited distillery in Kentucky. Last year, we had over 350,000 visitors. And my favorite tour is the ghost tour, by the way. We have about 7 or 8 tours. The ghost tour is pretty fun. One goal has never changed. We want to make the best whiskey in the world. That's our objective. We make great whiskey now, but we want to make better whiskey in the future. And always at a profit if we can, but a loss if we must, but always find bourbon. Isn't that a great saying? We're the world's most award-winning distillery. In anywhere on the planet, we win more awards than any other distillery. We do it by never compromising quality. We have a lot of different tastes. We age our barrels longer, and we're always experimenting with longer and longer. We use multiple recipes, and the last point is our innovation. We really try to innovate and try to make better whiskeys. So some people, I understand this is quite a technical group, but people ask me all the time what affects the taste of bourbon. I put some on a list here, and this is not all inclusive, but this is some of the major ones. The aging, obviously, the time in a barrel really affects the taste. The barrel is probably the majority of it. The seasoning, I mean, how long it sits outside the oak staves before we actually make a barrel. Very important. If you don't have much seasoning or outside, a lot of the tannins will stay and it'll become very tannic. So seasoning is extremely important. We've done lots of experiments with that. Char is important, and the type of wood is very important. As you can see, it's very small, but hemicellulose, lignans, tannins, and oak lactones that all contribute to the flavor profile of our bourbons. And as you know, all bourbons are actually new barrels by law. So that really impacts the flavor because of the barrel. And if you compare it against Canadian whiskey or Scotch whiskey, typically it's in a used barrel that's been used for something else previously because it's been tempered with the flavor from that product being in. And quite a bit of difference in terms of taste. It's like a tea bag. The first time you use it is very intense. If you have another tea with the same tea bag, it's less, and third and fourth and fifth time, less flavor contribution with each successive use. Then we have our grains and mash bills, like tasting the recipe I mentioned is very important. And here we're very happy because we have many different warehouses, not only in different locations, but within the warehouse, it varies in terms of taste also. Then there's the distillery and the process, which determines flavor too. You can take the same mash bill, make it in different distilleries, and it will taste differently. Yeast is a big factor in taste also, and also the water that you use to do all this. So this is a short list of some of the things that affect the taste of bourbon. So if you taste bourbon from here versus another distillery, it's going to be different. So maybe we should taste the first one. I've been doing a lot of talking. So let's taste the White Dog. This is how we make all our products with mash bill number 1. I think you have White Dog number 1. Has everybody got a sample? It's the clear sample?
Yes, everybody has samples for everything. Don't worry.
They do? Okay,
yes,
so you can use all those techniques to smell and taste that I was going through, or whatever you're comfortable with. You can use a Glencairn, you can use a old-fashioned glass, whatever. But when we nose this product, what mash number 1, this goes into making, after it's aged, Buffalo Trace, George T. Stagg, Eagle Rare, all those products. So on nose, you get a sweet vanilla and spicy nose. Not real spicy, but it's spicy. First thing you get is that corn, distillate, intense spiciness, and that sweetness. And this is kind of a little bit of oily on the palate. You certainly get a lot of corn, especially on the nose, but you should, because you're tasting the recipe. So you're tasting the corn, You're tasting the spiciness, but you haven't had the wood influence yet. So this is our white dog, and this happens to be at 125 proof. And believe it or not, I find 10% of the people who taste this actually like the taste. So there's somebody in this group on this call, there's probably 1 or 2 people that think it's pretty good.
Pretty awesome. It's pretty good.
Is it? There you go.
By the way, 125 proof is about 62.
62.5.
Yes.
ABV. Yeah.
Good question. I take it for granted because everybody talks proof here. Not everybody in the world talks proof. So how do we make bourbon whiskey? Good question. It must be made in the United States, not Kentucky only, it's in the United States. So you can make bourbon in any state in the United States. Majority has to be corn. It has to be distilled higher than 80 ABV, or lower than 80 ABV, sorry. I'm trying to convert. So 160 proof, you can't go above 160 proof or 80% alcohol. And the reason is because if you go over 190 proof, it technically becomes vodka. And vodka is more neutral, so you're really stripping the congeners away from the product. So that's why it's written in law, no higher than 160, so you maintain some of that flavor. And then you cannot put it in a barrel more than 125 proof. Again, that's to protect the taste. You could put it in higher and you would save a lot of money because you would use less barrels and less warehouse space, but it wouldn't taste the same. And one thing that's important that's probably different than most products, including Canadian and Scotch, is there's no artificial flavoring or colors allowed. So what you get is right out of the barrel, it's natural. And one other thing, the products that we make here at Buffalo Trace, we source GMO-free corn, which is not done in any of our major competitors, as far as I know. So that's another aspect that we don't really advertise much about, but because in the US, it's not a big factor, but around the world, it can be a big factor. So that's pretty important too. So we receive the grain from different places around the US, the corn, the rye. Sometimes we get some rye from Canada, especially in the Midwest, northern part, because the rye is the best quality rye in the Midwest US and South in Canada. And then before we unload, we sample, we take it and approve it before we unload it because we only accept the best. And then obviously after the receiving, we mill it and then we cook the grain in our cookers. We cook them separately, the ingredients. So the corn is cooked under high pressure and cooked for about an hour. Whereas the other grains, the rye, the wheat, the barley, is all done in atmospheric pressure separately and then combined together after the fact. And so when you do that, you protect the taste again of the flavoring grains like the rye and the wheat, because what happens is that you're not heating the heck out of them and getting rid of the flavor. So that's why we do it that way. It's actually more costly. Some of our competitors will actually put them all together and cook them all at once, but we do it separately and then we add them together. So when you do this and put them together, you have what we call a sweet mash. So if you were to come to Buffalo Trace and taste the mash, it would be actually slightly sweet to taste. And then we ferment. We add in what you probably heard, this sour mash. What we do is after the distillation process of removing the alcohol, some of the stuff that comes off the bottom of the still, that we call, that product we actually add to the next fermenter, and that creates the sour mash. And what we do that for, that sour mashing, is actually because it's low pH product, it actually prevents bacteria from growing, some contamination. So that's a good process. Plus, it allows you to gain some consistency from batch to batch to batch. So it evens it out better. So when we do that, everybody might make a big deal about it in the industry, about sour mash bourbon, but everybody does it. So it's not such a big deal. You know, maybe the small micro distilleries don't do that, but all the big distilleries do that. So once that process is completed of fermenting, it takes about 3 to 5 days, and we'll have about 7 or 8% alcohol. And then we send that sour mash to the still. The still is about 4 stories tall, and we introduce that mash from the top of the still, and it falls to the bottom. And as it falls, it's a series of plates with holes in them, and it falls through, but the steam is introduced from the bottom. And so what happens is the steam goes up and strips each of these plates, between plates, the alcohol and congeners up, and it distills it up, and all the mash falls to the bottom. So it's being distilled and redistilled as it travels up through the column. When it comes off the column, it comes out at about 60% alcohol. And then we do another distillation, so it's 2 distillations, and that's a doubler that we use. So you might hear that term in bourbon, a doubler. And what that means is that we double the distillation, we do it again. And we really, in that part of the process is a lot of copper, so we get rid of some of the sulfur compounds that may have been formed. And that doubling actually raises the proof, cleans it up a little bit to 135 proof. And again, at this stage, it's clear like the one we just tasted. And then because we're fortunate to have all these barrel locations at Buffalo Trace, each warehouse is different, and it's actually, the climate here is actually perfect for aging bourbon because it gets really hot during the day and cools at night. So it really drives the whiskey into the barrel and out of the barrel. So I think maybe this would be a good time to taste the next one. Since we're not talking about bourbon, let's do a Canadian because it's lighter in flavor. I'd like you to taste that one first. This one actually has, this is a single barrel. It's called Caribou Crossing, and you should have a sample of that. As you notice, the bottle has a caribou on top. And this is a Canadian whiskey. Again, it's aged in used barrels. This one happens to be a single barrel, but it's going to be a lighter flavor. So let's nose this one. Right away, you get a lot of caramel, butterscotch notes, very easy and approachable. You might get some spiciness. Some people get a little bit of like maybe fresh baked cookies, peaches, really quite light and fruity. And what's really good about Canadian whiskey is the smoothness. So when you taste it, the entry is really creamy. The mouthfeel is oily. You get that transition from fruitiness to spiciness. You might get some tropical fruit. And you do get some dry oak flavor towards the back of your palate afterwards. I think you'll see that. But you see how it transitions so nicely across the palate. Very easy to drink. We target over 10 years for this product of aging in Canada. That time I got some chocolate notes, maybe some mango and a slight citrus taste. Very refreshing, very easy to drink, very smooth. Everybody enjoy that one?
This has high percentage of rye in it?
Yes, there's rye in it. You can taste the rye, right? That's why I always go back to taste the recipe. You can actually taste the rye flavor, the spiciness on your palate. You guys don't have a refill, I do, so if I like it, I might take a little bit more. It really finishes with that rye spiciness on your tongue, right? Especially after you taste it a couple times. But that's Canadian, and typically it's called Canadian rye whiskey, at least in Canada. When they order a whiskey, they call it, give me a rye. And so that's why, because of that rye spiciness that sticks around. And if people mix this, it's just like bourbon. If there's a high percentage of rye, you can actually make great cocktails because the rye will come through that sweetness from the cocktail.
Used barrels meaning bourbon barrels?
Yes, correct. We actually have 2 distilleries in Canada. I'm aging some whiskeys now in new barrels too. So really coming along nicely. You would like to taste them with me someday. So we're experimenting there just like we are at Buffalo Trace.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, certainly.
Canada doesn't have American rules, right? So they don't have to use 51% corn?
Correct.
Is what we're drinking right now 51% corn?
It would be a mixture. This particular one is corn, wheat, rye, and barley malt. Canada, it just has to be a cereal grain. It doesn't have any more specifications than that. And it only has to be aged 3 years to be called Canadian whiskey.
Thank you.
But this one, you can tell it's a finer example of a Canadian whiskey because of the age and also the smoothness, how easy it is to drink straight. We have this product in our single barrel select, and it's doing awesome right now. People are really enjoying it. Oh, I thought it was a question. Somebody's
mute, guys.
Mute.
So there's me working hard from barrel selection. So when we have our barrel selection, that's what we have, a table like that. If you notice, the samples on the table are quite high. So when we look at samples, that many samples at once, we have actually diluted them. We dilute them to around 20% alcohol, 40 proof. And what that does is allow us to see the differences easier, because you get this alcohol fatigue, especially when you look at a lot of samples. We call it alcohol anesthesia. So you dull your nose and your senses. If you looked at that straight from the barrel, you would be gone in after 2 samples. So this is a technique we use in the industry, and it's used a lot of places where you dilute it with water so you can actually see the differences. We're not there to taste and enjoy it. We're there to look for characteristics that we like or don't like. One thing we do here at Buffalo Trace is we do honor that history, that tradition, but at the same time, we embrace change. This is actually the entrance to my lab. We have that same saying, honor tradition, embrace change. This distillery has a history of firsts, of doing things differently, and there's some examples on there. We won the best whiskey in the world title with this product, E.H. Taylor 4-grain whiskey. You might be familiar with it. It's very rare to buy right now because there's only so much was made. But what happens is this was an experiment. And so that was the objective, is we do these experiments. We have hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of experiments going on. So this honor tradition, embrace change. Embracing change is trying different things and experimenting. And this is the best example where we had an experiment, turned out to be the best whiskey in the world. We also get a lot of awards about innovation. Most innovative distillery in the world. We have our micro still, which actually probably we installed about 2006. So we've been experimenting for years. Some of the Small distilleries, the micro distilleries have been doing this for a few years, but we've been doing it for many years. So we have a distillery within our distillery experimenting all the time. We also have our Warehouse X. This is a warehouse built to experiment with warehousing. Just because we warehouse the same way all these years doesn't mean it's the best. So we're looking at ways of manipulation to see if we can warehouse differently or make better whiskeys. There's an example. The top left, there's 5 chambers, which includes a breezeway, which gives you the natural temperature variations. And we can control the other variables in those other chambers. So we're experimenting. We've been experimenting. We've got a 20-year plan of experimenting, trying to determine the best variables to age our products. Very, very much a fun experiment. We also have experiments with grains and different. We just released one recently, a Bijou style whiskey. I don't know if anybody's ever tasted it, but we use sorghum and beans. And so we're trying to experiment to see if there is a better whiskey available. So we've released 26 releases since 2006. And what this does is show people these different experiments. We may experiment with the barrel, we may experiment with the mash bill, we may experiment with just about anything you can think, the process. We have a lot of fans at Buffalo Trace. We like to think of our fans as they're really fanatics. Some people, they'll line up in liquor stores waiting for our releases. Some people are extreme, putting tattoos on, but they're actually waiting for our products at the door when the liquor store opens. So that we got a lot of great fans, and we appreciate that. One thing I do know that we need more bourbon. And so we're making more whiskey. Every year I've been here, we've been making more. So let's maybe taste the next one. We'll go with Buffalo Trace, if that's all right, since we'll. So when we, this is our namesake bourbon. And this is a great product, a very well-balanced bourbon. See, on the nose, you get that vanilla, caramel, from the wood, this maybe touch of cinnamon, almost like molasses, like a rum-like note, and that spiciness.
You mentioned rum, it's the ether smell that gets outside.
So when you taste it, you get like a brown sugar initially, a dark fruit, maybe a prune, raisin type note, toffee note. And then it transmits, it actually goes towards the tips of your tongue or the sides of your tongue. You get that spiciness, the sweetness, maybe some toffee notes again, and some cinnamon, some spicy notes. And then you try it again and you pick up some more flavors. Wow. I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. You're in the evening, I'm not. But you see how balanced that is. When I say balanced, I'm talking about you can pick out all the different components. You can pick out that the sweetness, the molasses type character, the dark fruits, maybe plum. Then it transmits and transitions to more of a spicy note, maybe more of a toffee character in the middle of your palate. And then at the back, you get that kind of oak dryness. So you see how balanced it goes from beginning, middle to end. And that's very typical of our products, that you get to pick out the different components that you see. So you can taste that age. You know this is not aged 3 years. You know it's aged around 8 years because you can taste it. Everybody get that, I hope? So just continuing on with that more whiskey theme, every year since I've been here, and it's been almost 18 years, is we've made more and more and more. The thing is, it's never, never enough. So we're investing over $1 billion over the next few years. Here's an example. These are fermenter pads, new fermenters. We're putting up a new still as we speak. There's going to be the finished product. Right beside our old one is going to look like the old building because we want to honor that tradition. And then we have all these new warehouses going up. Every 5 or 6 months, we're putting up a new warehouse just to keep up with the projected demand. So if you have a product that's 10 years old, you have to start putting it away now. It takes 10 years to age it. So there's the design concept, and there's the actual. So as one's being filled, the other one's being constructed. So every 5 to 6 months, it's costing us $30 million to build and fill these warehouses. Each warehouse has about 1.2 million cases of Buffalo Trace. So I always tell everybody, you better start drinking Buffalo Trace. And then that honoring tradition, we built a new bottling facility. It's ultra modern bottling facility. You can see that's a bottling facility in that picture, but it looks like it's a warehouse. So we want to honor tradition. We don't want it to look like a bottling facility. So we spend a lot of money, I think over $1 million, making it look like a warehouse. So it fits into the environment here. So it's very important to us. And if you ever come for a tour, you'll see what I'm talking about. There it is finished. This is one slide I wanted to talk about a little bit. This is our family tree, so to speak. You can see on the bottom axis, mash number 1, or the bourbon number 1 there on the bottom. That's the White Dog we just tasted. And those are the products that are made with that particular mash and that recipe. Then you have number 2, then you have the wheated, then you have the rye. We have several others, but this is generally what we usually talk about. So maybe we should taste the next one, if that's all right. Eagle Rare. Same recipe, if you look on this grid, as Buffalo Trace, but it's aged 10 years. So generally what happens when you age bourbon 10 years is that you're adding more complexity to it and more dominance of the oak and the wood. So the barrel becomes more important all the time. So when you nose this compared to Buffalo Trace, you should get a little more oak immediately on the nose. You get that dark fruit, but more intense, more depth to it, more complexity. You might even get some notes of cherry and a hint of maybe milk chocolate. Some people get a little citrus note. I don't know if you get that. Some people say orange.
Totally orange.
Yeah. And when you taste it, it's almost like a brown sugar, nutty, oily. It's nice and oily. You do get some of that fruit, that raisin, and you might even pick up some old leather there. It's starting to develop, just starting. And then at the end, you're going to get that oak dominance that's lingering, and it's dry towards the back of your palate. And the second sip is even better. Now you start to see it transition across the palate. Anybody get maybe some dates and figs too, that dark fruit? Really rich and robust, right? But I hope what you can see is the Buffalo Trace difference between the Buffalo Trace and the Eagle Rare. The Eagle Rare tends to be more oak dominant. Buffalo Trace more balanced. You can pick out all the different components as you taste it. So each one would be good for a different situation, basically.
The Eagle Rare feels less sweet, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, because of the other components taking more dominant, but it's still sweet, right? You still got those fruits, but you're right. Some people say the Buffalo Trace is sweeter because it's less age. You see it more, the corn, the fruitiness coming through. That's a good observation.
It's not the same mash bill. It's not the same mash bill.
Yes, it is the same mash bill.
So it's only aged 2 years more than.
Correct. But
and it's a huge difference. Huge difference.
Huge difference. Brilliant. That's exactly right. And that's how we can differentiate some of our products by age. But some people, in a room of 100 people, 50 people prefer the sweeter Buffalo Trace, 50 will like the Eagle Rare. In a room of 100 people, consumers, that's the case. But if you've got connoisseurs, people who like bourbons and whiskeys, majority prefer Eagle Rare. It depends on the, yeah.
I'm sorry, does it have to do something with the sherry casks? Maybe it's reminding me some of the sweeter kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm used to Scotch whiskies and I'm just trying to compare.
Yeah, you probably are, but there's no sherry casks involved. It's not finished in anything. This is straight new barrels. But a lot of the tastes are a result of the distillate interacting with the new wood. Whereas if you look at a Scotch being used wood, a lot of those characters will not be strong at all, right? Because it's used, it's already spent. Whereas here, it's all brand new, so a lot of the complexity will increase because it's used in new barrel. But no sherry, you're right.
Sorry, thank you.
You're welcome. So this is our family tree. We talked about the white dog and the caribou. Well, we don't have wheated bourbon. Well, wheated bourbon is our Weller. If you get a chance to try it, I'm not sure it's available where you are, but wheat is much softer, more palatable. You probably wish you would get it, right?
This is exactly what I wanted you to stop on this whiskey, exactly, and this one. And the Pappy Van Winkle, I just want to understand the phenomenon that's going on around these whiskeys, because this is something that is very unusual. And
well, this is a different recipe. So this and Pappy are the same recipe. This is a wheated bourbon. So majority is corn, just because it's a bourbon. The second grain is wheat. There is no rye in this. So wheat is really something that softens and accentuates some of the fruitiness, the sweetness of the product. So you won't have that bite of the rye spice coming through. So it's very palatable, very easy for people to drink. And the Pappy is one that's actually older. This one is not as old as Pappy. The Pappy is so rare to get a Pappy bottle anywhere in the world. They're charging an arm and a leg for it. But one thing you should know is that we don't charge an arm and a leg. It's the secondary market that charges the arm and the leg.
Yeah, you can buy Weller for $20 in.
Yeah, but it's a great whiskey because Weller eventually will become Pappy.
Yes.
But Pappy being old, when you put a Pappy barrel away for 23 years, there's less than 10 gallons remaining in the barrel. So you're really concentrating that flavor in that barrel.
This is a good question. When we're talking about Angel's share in Scotland and in the States, you're probably getting what, 5, 6, 10% Angel's share?
Yes, the Angels here in Kentucky are very happy compared to Scotland.
Yes.
Because Scotland will get probably 2% or 3% per year. We're much higher. We're 3 times as high.
What's the temperature difference?
Because we really, when it's hot, the pressure inside the barrel is high and it shoves it into the wood. Then even at night, it cools, it comes out. So it's always going in and out of the wood.
Is that 10% a year?
Yeah, the first year we lose 10%.
Wow.
So when you take a bottle of Eagle Rare, you lose a lot because it's 10 years. You don't have much left after 10 years. Just remember, the alcohol is evaporating, or the alcohol is slower because it's a bigger molecule than the water, so the water goes out first. So you're really concentrating. So some of our releases of the antique collection, one year the Stag was over 140 proof, over 70% alcohol. And remember, it's only put in at 125 proof. So you see how the alcohol goes up because the water is evaporating. Scotland, it tends to be the opposite, and cognac, the same thing. So this is an ideal place to age bourbon. If we age bourbon in Scotland, it wouldn't age very well, especially in a new barrel. So the phenomenon with Weller is a different story. I don't know why all of a sudden. All I know is 18 years ago, I came to Buffalo Trace, and you could get Pappy Van Winkle anywhere. As a matter of fact, Julian Van Winkle said people would call him up, distributors, and say, can you take this back because it's gathering dust?
Wow.
So that's not even 20 years ago. And today, you cannot find this bottle probably. Well, the only place is secondary, but that's not the place to buy it. But liquor stores very rarely will give you an opportunity to buy it at retail.
Above 2,000 pounds in auctions, above 2,000 pounds or sterling, above 2,000 sterlings for Pappy 12.
All I can tell you is if you want a secret or tip, buy Weller and you're getting a great quality product, just as good. It's not as old. Weller 12 is really good. That's one of the best values if you can get the 12.
400 euros.
Yikes.
Yes, around 400 euros, yeah.
Well, unfortunately, that's the way it is today. Most of our products here in Kentucky don't even get on the shelf. You can't go and buy this on the shelf in Kentucky, where we actually make it. So don't be disheartened because we're in the same boat.
I actually once sent an email to Buffalo Trace, to you guys, asking how the hell can I get Weller? They said we distribute it once a year for $50 or something like this, and that's it.
I know a good secret to tell you. His name is Richard. He can help you with that.
We'll talk later. We'll talk about this later.
Exactly. He's gonna hate me.
Thanks for hanging me out there, Drew. Appreciate it.
We'll talk about this later, man.
Well, I can guarantee you we're putting more away. It's just it never seems to be enough, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to change gears a little bit, I wanted to give you an example of another distillery that we own, which is entirely different. This one was winning awards too. This is our 1792 distillery, and this is in Bardstown, Kentucky. And so it was actually established in 1792. 1879, but it's based on the 1792 is when Kentucky joined statehood. That's where the name came from. And it's a distillery that is outstanding, and it's really starting to win quite a few awards, and people really like the taste. So I thought we should taste this one too, because what it's going to show is the difference from Buffalo Trace to another distillery, because we use a different distillery, different yeast. It's a different environment. So let's taste that one.
Different distillery, but same mash bill, or different mash bill as well?
Different mash bill. It's a higher rye.
Thank you.
See, right away, I get a different nose for sure. I get that baking spices, vanilla, caramel, almost like a cinnamon raisin bread. And some people get this fruitiness, and if I tell you, you're going to go, yes, it's a ripe fruit. And a lot of people get this banana character. And as soon as I say that, some people get it, but it's got that ripe fruit nose. And the richness on the taste, this is aged around 8 years too. You really get that sweet vanilla spiciness, almost a candied cherry note. And that dark fruit, you get some of those characteristics you get even in Eagle Rare, that date and fig, that dark fruit. And then it transitions to that oak dryness in the back, really quite rich and I think a fabulous tasting bourbon. Some people prefer this over Buffalo Trace, as a matter of fact.
One of the greatest finishes.
Yeah, it's a great, very good comment.
The smell is extraordinary. The nose is unbelievable.
It's underestimated bourbon that's really, actually, I think it's more available than Buffalo Trace, at least here in the US. But because it's starting to win awards, people are starting to buy it now. And I may talk about the awards like it's the best. It's not important to us really, even though we might talk about it. What's important is that the consumer likes the taste of our product. Otherwise, the awards they may buy it once, but they're not going to buy it again if they don't like it. So really what we're focused on is the taste of the product. I almost get a buttered popcorn note on the finish too. But anyways, it really is a spicy finish because it's a little higher spice, but it offsets the sweetness too of those fruits, those ripe fruits. Oh, one thing I didn't mention is the proof is a little bit higher. I don't know which version you have, but it's a little bit higher, so it really pops on the mouth, all those flavors.
46.8.
That's what we have. Small batch, 1792.
Yeah, so when people
46.8.
Probably the people who enjoy bourbons, they prefer, after you drink them for a period of time, they like the higher proof because the flavors accentuate with the higher proof. So, you know, there's some places we sell Buffalo Trace at 80 proof or 40%, and people prefer the 90 proof. The reason we sell it at a lower proof is not because we want to make more money, it's because the laws in those countries tax our products really high if it's a higher proof. So a lot of times we'll have an 80 proof for certain countries, but people prefer the higher proof.
Same here for tax per ABV.
Yeah. But
can you maybe talk about higher proof? When you're talking about higher proof, you're also talking about maybe chill filtration or
yes, sir. Yes, that's a very good point.
So the question,
so we have products. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. No, that's fine. It's fine. I'm with you.
So we have products that are not chill filtered. These here are all chill filtered. So
even the 46.8, even the 1792 is also chill filtered.
Yeah, yeah. As far as I know, it is.
You won't get any kind of taste if you leave it without chill filtering. It's too clear for it.
Usually, what we like to, if it's over 100 proof, then we probably get away with not chill filtering.
So this is different from
the
Scotch.
higher the proof.
Yeah.
So what happens though is when you chill and you filter, you take away flavor.
Yes.
But why do you do that? Everybody does it. And the reason we do that is because if you didn't chill filter it, all these products would be flocking, or they would be cloudy. So all the fatty acids and esters would come out of solution because water, they don't dissolve in water. But in alcohol, when it's higher proof, they dissolve in the alcohol. And that's why it doesn't cloud when it's a higher proof.
Sure.
So if you were to take one of our high proof products like the Antique Collection, uncut, unfiltered, and add some water and some ice, it may cloud up because they'll come out of solution. They're not dissolved in water. So the reason people chill filter is so that it doesn't flock or it doesn't become cloudy. But when you do filter it, you're taking flavor, those esters away. So it's less flavorful. And that's why a lot of the experts love the unfiltered products. The thing is, you cannot have an 80 proof or 90 proof that's not chill filtered because it will flock, it will cloud up, and people won't like it.
Is that an aesthetics thing?
Yes, sir. You will like the taste, but you won't like the looks.
Yeah.
So it's funny you mentioned that because we talk about it sometimes as we should put out a lower proof, like 80 or 90 proof, that's not chill filtered, and it will be cloudy. People know it will be cloudy, but the taste will be good.
This is for us. Fun. Yes, this is for us.
But see, we're always exploring stuff. Exactly what you're describing is we're interested in the taste. The problem is consumers don't like the looks. But if you market it that it's cloudy because the taste is good, maybe it'll be different.
Anyway, can I ask a question?
Sure.
What do you do with the used barrels, with the old one?
Yes, that's a good question. We have so many distilleries around the world. We send those barrels to those other distilleries. We also have contracts with certain people to take our barrels because our barrels are really in demand because because our products are so award-winning. People want our barrels. So actually, most of them go to our plants around the world. So we have a Canadian distillery. We also have rum that we use these barrels with, and then even our cognac distillery uses them. So we use them ourselves mostly. Yeah. Good question though.
Ziv, do you know Shevet's beer? Bira Shevet.
I heard of it.
If you look inside the factory, there is Buffalo Trace barrels, pretty good ones.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah. Even here, around the corner.
I could tell you who uses our barrels because we sell them, but I can't disclose because we have non-disclosure agreements.
You can't tell which Scottish distillery uses your barrels?
I can't tell you any distillery.
Barry, I think you're not in mute.
If I'm not in mute, I'll ask a question. What's the percentage of the rye in the mash in the 1792?
We usually don't disclose our recipes. But you can
give me the rye. Don't give me the whole recipe. How dominant, or you know what? Just tell me how dominant is the rye. Is it considered a high percentage dominant? Just give me an indication of character.
I can tell you it's higher than Buffalo Trace. How's that? But you know what I tell people honestly? This is the honest. What I tell people is, by the taste, you can tell if it's higher or lower than certain products because of the taste. You can taste that spiciness.
That's why I asked, because I felt, in my opinion, it's a bit higher, the rye here. That's why I actually asked the question.
I always tell people, trust your taste. And you're right, 100%.
I think so far, out of everything we've tasted, this has been my favorite up till now. Just my personal opinion.
If we had all day, I could dig out 100 more samples and you'd have a new favorite pretty quick. So this leads us to our last taste, and this is not a bourbon. This is a straight rye. The legal definition is that it has to be at least 51% rye. The second grain is corn, and barley malt is the third grain. So this, by definition, is going to be spicy because of the makeup of the recipe.
Drew, can I ask a question about one of our previous tastings?
Sure.
We tasted a Canadian whiskey, and is this produced in your facilities in the USA?
No, it's produced in our distillery in Canada.
Okay, because I mean, to be Canadian whiskey, obviously it must be produced in Canada, same as in Scotland?
Correct. We have two Canadian distilleries in Canada. We have our Montreal distillery and the Collingwood distillery.
So this is produced in Canada, okay.
By law, it has to be produced in Canada, yes, and aged in Canada.
And aged.
Yeah, you can bottle it in the US, but you cannot age it in the US. So again, Canadian whiskey, a lot of them are used barrels. So you notice the Canadian was lighter in flavor, right? Compared to a bourbon. But also it's the makeup of the recipe because a lot of it comes from corn. So it's a high percentage of corn, but then there's also flavors that go in. So it's a lighter style, very smooth. The good news is that our distilleries in Canada are making more flavorful whiskeys now because we're involved. We're experimenting with a lot of different types of whiskeys. So give us a few more years and we're going to have a whole series of new Canadian whiskeys.
Can I ask another question? You mentioned that you're using, you don't use pot stills, you're using continuous distillation?
We do use one pot still. It's called the doubler.
But in Canada, do you use the same method of distillation? It's the continuous distillation, or do you?
Yes, continuous.
But you don't use pot stills basically in bourbon or Canadian whiskey.
Well, we have in our Montreal distillery, we have the capability of pot still and continuous. So we're experimenting with that. But typically, a lot of Canadian whiskey is column, yes. It's a lighter flavored whiskey.
In America, would you say most American whiskeys, not only Buffalo Trace, is continuous?
Most, but there are pot stills, yes.
There are pot stills.
See, our second distillation is a pot still. It's called a doubler.
Okay, thank you.
So this one here is our Sazerac rye, which is a straight rye, at least 51% corn. And you don't have to ask about the recipe, how much rye, because I can't tell you.
This is almost
but
medicinal.
You can taste it.
This is almost medicinal.
You get a herbal quality.
Herbal quality, medicinal, herbal. You can almost taste.
Yes, you get kind of clove. I get a lot of Christmas spices.
Yeah. Like
cinnamon, vanilla. Some people, believe it or not, get a dill note. I don't know, depending on the person.
I feel like dry apricots.
Yeah, that's good. I've heard that lots of times too. And so when you taste it, now look at the transition. And you can see the building of the rye spiciness, but it starts very, very sweet, fruity, almost a candy type orange note. You see how it builds from that sweetness down to the spicy and really, really peppery. Just taste it again, you'll see that transition.
This is the longest finish that I've had from all this. It's never ending. Actually,
it's a great, great whiskey. And you get that pepper, that black pepper, almost a licorice note there on the finish. It's very crisp and dark fruit.
In my workshops that I do on our bourbons, I call it not whiskey, crispy.
It gives you that. It's really refreshing for me. And this is a straight rye. We also have another one called Thomas Handy, which is uncut, unfiltered version of this. And so that whiskey has won best whiskey. It's always rated very high. And I just have you note that it's the same whiskey as this, except it's uncut, unfiltered.
Drew,
so straight from the barrel.
Drew, can I ask you, does every bourbon have to be 51% corn, even if it's rye whiskey?
It's straight. It's got to be 51% corn to be a rye bourbon.
To be a rye bourbon, it's got to be 51% corn.
Correct, by law. So you can't make it. You can't make it with 42%.
Cool. You can't go less on the corn.
Correct.
But in Canada, you can.
Yes, sir.
So would you in Canada would you have high percentage rye whiskeys which are basically higher rye than corn?
Yeah, some distilleries, Alberta distilleries has 100% rye.
100% rye, but you can't do that in the USA.
No. Well, you can do 100% rye, but it's not a bourbon.
Ah, but it's still called American whiskey.
Yeah, it's a whiskey.
It could be American rye whiskey.
You can call it rye, yeah. It's not a straight rye, though. In Canada, you can make a whiskey out of 100% corn, and you can call it rye whiskey.
Really?
Really screw with your mind today. No, seriously, you can. It's written in the Canadian regulations that it can be called a rye whiskey if there's no rye in it.
How does that make sense?
It doesn't.
That's Canadian sense.
Yes, Canadian sense. I'm Canadian, by the way.
Well, Canadian sense.
Actually, I'm actually dual. I'm American and Canadian. I was born Canadian. And it doesn't make any sense. But you know, when I grew up in Canada, we would always we wanted a rye whiskey, we got a Canadian whiskey. We just called it rye whiskey. It's from its history. It was made with rye at one time, and it's carried through all these years, so it's called a rye whiskey. It's got to do with the heritage. It doesn't make any sense, you're right. This makes sense. This is a straight rye whiskey. Has to be at least 51% by law. And so
what does it stand for when you say straight rye? What is the straight?
It's 2 years minimum. But in the States, if it's 2 years, you have to put the age on the bottle. Anything less than 4 years, you have to put the age on the bottle.
Yeah, you have to. It's compulsory if it's less than 4 years.
Yes. So if you don't have an age, you know it's at least 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I want to talk about on this rye is I hope you taste some sweet fruitiness that's coming through, those fruit flavors, because what that means is there's a healthy portion of corn in this. And I'll go back to my original comment when I started is you're tasting the recipe. So if this was like 90% rye, you might not get that sweetness as much, but because you taste it, that means it's there probably from the corn. So that's why I think this is a very palatable and easy to drink product because the percentage of corn is quite high.
Do you make single grain whiskeys? So obviously, as you said, it wouldn't be a bourbon if it's 100% rye, but do you make them?
Well, we might have an experiment. I can't comment specifically on that.
All right.
We have thousands of barrels of experiments. So, and if you don't use barley in it, then you have to use enzymes, right?
Right. And so you would have to use enzymes, but for example, like bourbon, you have to have at least 51% corn, right?
Corn, correct. 100%.
What about 100% corn? Is that something you also do? Like, is that something that?
Yeah, we do corn whiskey. Yes.
Right.
We use that for a product called American blended whiskey. So an American blended whiskey is a straight whiskey, and usually that's corn whiskey. And American blended whiskey, we can put in neutral grain spirits and straight whiskey. So it's the category is meant to be the most inexpensive whiskey you can buy because you can add non-aged product to it. So here you can get a 1.75 for about $12. And what people do with that is they mix it with their favorite mix, right? So that's where we use the corn whiskey. That's it for me, guys. If you have any other questions, gals?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. Before the questions, I'm going to refer for everybody in English, in Hebrew. אנחנו רוצים לצלם את כולם ככה בתמונות קטנות בזום עם הערכות בידיים, אז אל תתנתקו, זה חשוב לי. ולפני שאנחנו ניפרד מדרו, אחרי שניפרד מדרו נעשה את זה, בסדר? So, Drew, thank you.
Thank you very much.
If you can hear our applause, but thank you.
Don't need applause. Just drink all the products that you have in front of you.
Thank you, Drew. It was fascinating.
Thank you.
How do we get hold of one of your experimental barrels and bottle it for our whiskey club?
Oh, impossible.
Impossible.
It's project.
Not possible.
We talked before with Asaf, and it's a project that we are building and working on for bringing 1 or 2 or 3 bars of 1792.
סיבה, אל תחשוף יותר מדי, אני כמו שאמרתי בהתחלה, היום זה השיתוף הפעולה הראשון שלנו, ויש לנו עוד הרבה הפתעות בשבילכם, אתם אחלה חבר'ה, ואני מאמין שהיום בעצם זו הייתה יריית הפתיחה, אבל בהמשך לשאלה הזאת יש לנו כמה דברים, אנחנו כמובן...
יש עוד דברים בקנה שאנחנו כרגע נשמור אותם
כן, ואנחנו נדבר על זה בהמשך.
אני רוצה להגיד משהו בעברית, לפני שאנחנו מודים לדרו, אני רוצה להגיד לחבר'ה מקספי, באמת עשיתם עבודה, באמת אחלה עבודה, ערכות, אני חייב לציין שזה ערכות טעימה הכי מרשימות שאני נתקלתי בהן, ארגון מופתי, וסחטן על כל זה ועל השיתוף פעולה בינינו.
תודה רבה.
הוא עדיין, Drew is already still here for questions or is gone?
No, I'm still here.
May I ask something, please? Drew, thank you very much for exceptionally invigorating talk that became more and more invigorating with... do you...
Cheers.
Like in the Scottish Scotch industry, do you mix barrels of different ages in order to maintain your taste profile? In other words, could there be older barrels inside the 8 or 10-year-olds than the listed age?
100%. That's what we do is, as blenders, you want to make products consistent. So sometimes you may have some segment of your blend that's younger in a different area of the warehouse, and you need to compensate with older. So sometimes that's possible, yes.
And considerably older, or just?
No, not really considerably, but some products like our antique collection, we do have considerably older. It depends on what I have available to blend when we have our antique collection.
Thank you.
Drew, you were talking a lot earlier about experimentation projects. How much does an experimentation project like the single oak, which lasted several years, how much does that go into your mainstay sort of distilling and aging process?
Well, actually, that one took many, many years. That was very complex. But normally it's not that complex. So I don't know. Are you looking for a time frame?
No, I'm just wondering how much of your mainstay product now has been influenced by your experimentation.
Well, it varies. Like, the 4 grain, we had such success and we like the product so much. It's part of our yearly put away now because basically we're adding another recipe. So everything we learned, we try to make better. And if we find something we really like, we start making it every year. We don't really talk about what we're doing, but there's lots of examples of that. So we have made whiskey based on some of these experiments, yes.
And there are experiments that you poured down the drain?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we do that. But the only thing we do is, and I just got some the other day, is we take samples, a couple cases of samples. So we have failed experiment. We have this repertoire of failed experiments that we keep just to refer back to if we have to.
Thank you.
But you know what? We fail more than we succeed, so.
Any further questions?
Do you maybe intend on the future releasing cask strength products, meaning foolproof products?
Yeah, we release a lot of them. We actually released our benchmark, which is our lowest age bourbon, and we have higher proofs on that. So we do that regularly, yes.
Yeah, okay. With which products? You talked about the antique?
No, this one actually is our lowest aged product in benchmark.
Okay. Oh, benchmark, yeah, I know this.
Yeah, we have that.
And 1792.
And 1792, yeah.
Anything else?
That's all. Fantastic to everyone. Thank you very much. And to the CASPIRIT team, thank you for everything, for setting us up. Thank you likewise for getting everyone together. And Drew, great session.
Thank you.
I hope everyone enjoyed it. It was really good.
Great session. Thank you. Thank you very much for everything.
Thank you, guys.
אל תתנתקו בבקשה, זה חשוב לי. Thank you, Drew. Thank you, Richard. Thank you from...
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you. מה שאני רוצה שנעשה זה שנצלם כאילו אולי את הבקבוקים, אולי את הערכה.
לא, את הערכה, נראה לי, את הערכה זה אמור להיות הכי, זה הדבר הכי...
מה שאתם עושים, אני עושה.
יאללה, מוכנים?
ככה אתם רוצים? זה ריק.
מה שבא לכם.
לא, את החיצוני, את החלק החיצוני.
איך זה נראה? ששלחתם לנו ריק, זה לא טוב.
לא, חיצוני.
יאללה, אני אצלם, מוכנים? 1, 2, 3.
זהו?
כן, אנחנו סבבה לגמרי.
חבר'ה, תודה רבה לכם.
תודה רבה, היה כיף, מקווים שנהנתם.
ניר, אנחנו נדבר.
תודה רבה. משתמע, ברור, אסף, ברור. ביי חבר'ה, לילה טוב.
שבת שלום.
לילה טוב, חבר'ה.
לילה טוב.
תודה רבה לכל המארגנים. ביי.